Welcome to Data Myths Podcast with your hosts, Brian and Malinda Gagnon.
So, a little about us. I'm interested in how tech helps us improve our lives. I have 20 years experience in digital communications. I'm an ex-Googler and now help launch new companies and products.
And I've spent 20 plus years evangelizing tech at some of the world's largest companies. Whether you're a dataphile or a dataphobe, we have something for you on this podcast. So get ready. Let's go.
Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Well, I'm a little sleepy this morning. I kind of wanted to sleep in and watch the snowfall. Once again, we're getting snow here in Maine, so I've been looking at places in way south of here where snow doesn't happen.
Yeah, plowing has been frequent. It's been a lot this winter. But, why sleep in when you can record a podcast?
Yeah, no,
come on.
That feels like the right thing to say right now.
Yeah.
So
it's good times. So something that's been on our minds, I think, in the last, couple of weeks or so is this idea of like what we've been seeing with tech company development and how the value of that has changed over time, and so much debate swirling around about, user trust and how is value continuing or eroding and all of that. And it comes back to this pretty core concept of network effect and kind of what that means and how that's changed.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept because we've heard and we've talked to a lot of startups lately, and one of the things that we hear from most of them is, hey, we really want to get to 100,000 or 1 million people in the first year or 2 years, or else we're dead. And I guess my question to you, if you make a tech company and you don't get to that scale, are you truly dead? Because, I don't know, I guess.
Well, and that's so important to kind of peel that back, because is your product or service dependent on the number of users to see value? And if the number of users doesn't actually increase value as that number increases, then maybe you shouldn't worry about it so much. And I think it is, like you say, one of those key stats that you just put in the investor deck, as one of your milestones. But really think about what it means.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I've just been thinking about that a lot because we've seen a lot of great companies that have built this. And I guess to fast forward, right, network effect is really that amplification, right, where more users create more value of the network. And so everybody chases that because that's sort of nirvana.
Yeah. It's and if that's what your model is reliant on, well, yes, of course. Then you need to have a bulletproof plan on how to get to that critical mass of your user base. And that key question that every young company has, that truly needs that network effect to see value, that what are you going to do for the users who come on board with you, the early adopters, before they can see the value that's inherent once everybody else joins? Is there some kind of free aspect? Is there, new features? Like, what do they get for hanging with you until they can really see the true value?
Well, and when I think about it, right, that is exactly it, right? Which is, what is that value barrier that someone is willing to either pay or forego or shift from where they're at today, what network they're in today, to a new network? Is it because Aunt Millie, who I don't even have an Aunt Millie, but that name always pops in my head. Is it because Aunt Millie starts sharing her photos and then you migrate to that network? Is it, well, Aunt Millie's photos aren't that interesting, but now that Aunt Millie and all my cousins and extended family and now my friends are on it, when do I make that jump?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that just in the world of kind of psychology, adoption, and all that, the bandwagon effect. So I'm sure people are familiar with the very old term of jumping on the bandwagon, and that came back. It's in play now because of politics, and they literally used a bandwagon to promote campaigns. Small history footnote, but it's this idea of, you see everybody else doing it, whether it's, a fashion trend, a behavior, a belief, can be anything. And whether it's the desire of someone to just conform, because that's part of human nature, to want to be a part of, a group and not stand out as the weirdo or the, apart from everyone, or that there is something just truly appealing there that they want to join in on. FOMO at its finest. Yeah.
Nice. But FOMO works in the opposite direction as well, right? So if you think about that building a network effect, right? And I think if we look back in history, Facebook's a pretty easy one, but before Facebook, there was MySpace. Before MySpace, there was Friendster. Before that, who knows what there was, but there probably
I don't
was
remember. I still didn't have internet before Friendster, I think.
I was early.
I did enjoy Friendster, though, very much.
Yep. And so, when you think about that, what caused those to die, right? So I don't know. I wasn't on Friendster, but I definitely was on MySpace. I think it just got to the point where the value, or there was just congestion, right? Everybody was messaging you that you didn't know. There was a ton of people that weren't actually people. There were bands. There were everybody else trying to hawk and sell something. So to me, it just got a lot less interesting because it felt kind of a lot like Craigslist, right? Where there was no, barrier or no entry, barrier that caused some of these bots or, sales tactics to emerge. And then it kind of crowded the network, and to find the things that were actually real, it became kind of difficult.
So that curve, if we want to think about that positive growth in creating the network effect, and you may hear a phrase thrown around, a positive externality. It has a positive effect, right? So it's growing users are being added. The value is growing proportional to that user base. And then, we've reached some kind of limit like that you're talking about, whether it's congestion, that whatever network it is or platform, it can't keep up with what's there.
Right.
So, or it's just saturation, that there's so much going on that it's just overload in some fashion. So that's kind of the top of the curve. And then, oh no, it's like inverse network effect. So like negative externality, and people start dropping off and the value starts dropping.
Great. And so that's Bob Metcalf came up with Metcalf's law, which basically states that, and the interesting part that I saw with this, right, is Metcalf's law was all about devices, right? Mm-hmm. He was talking about, we add phones to a network, and the more phones that you add, the value of the network is exponential comparatively to the number of devices.
Yeah.
I think that's incredibly interesting.
It is. So when you think, what year was that? That was what, mid 80s?
That was actually 90, probably 91, 92. It's about the time that started to come about.
So he's saying the value of the network is equal to the number of connected users squared. That's like his equation. But the users, like we talk in terms of users now. It's like our modern day definition. But yeah, he was talking about quote unquote compatible communicating devices like the phone and the fax machine.
Well, and I think the interesting part with that, right, is so if we sort of play that forward, so Metcalf's law is basically talking about the exponential growth of value of the network. But when you really start to look at that, the cost of the network is usually growing faster as you scale to a certain point than the actual value that's being produced to the people that own the network. So when you look at that, it's interesting to me because when we see a lot of these companies that are saying, hey, I've got to get to 1 million users, or I've got to get to 100,000 users. And then the question I usually ask is, well, guys, how scalable is this? Is this going to, is your Amazon AWS bill or Azure bill going through the roof as you're adding people? And most times people say, oh no, this scales perfectly linearly to whatever. But when we come back 6 months later or whatever, there's always something where they're like, oh no, actually there's a huge cost. We can't onboard more people.
Yeah, yeah. And this evolution from connected devices to connected users, that shift is really kind of where we're seeing the technology growth in the past 15 years.
Right. Well, and think about it. It's software.
Mm-hmm.
So we've gone from a hardware basis of networks, whether it be Ethernet ports, and looking at that as number of devices in the network, or looking at things like cell phones, one cell phone to one person. Well, that stuff started to change now. And now we're on more of a software basis where everything is software defined. And because of that, users can grow mostly independent from, traditional, measurement. So, but now let's insert Internet of Things.
Dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So, IoT, we're going back to what Metcalfe first started with, right? Because now we have networks of things. And as a result of that, we're getting to the point where autonomy of devices is coming. And so rather than us, the users, being able to select things, devices are going to be able to select the networks that they want to join or that they have the capability to join. And that's really interesting to me because that is definitely changing how we need to think about, networking.
And how we need to think about value.
Absolutely. And so I listened to a podcast just the other day, and they were talking about the internal and external network effect. And I don't think they quite understood the terms. I think they were trying to sort of make up some terms for their blog or whatever. But the reality of it is the externality of a network is actually the pressure. It's not the partners, right?
Tell me about that, pressure versus partners.
Well, so when I think about network, right, there is the network effect of the users and there is the network effect of your partner or ecosystem. And so when I think about those two, that's not internal or external. That's just in the system. That's in the network of things, right? So the real key to measuring your network and how that's growing is really adding the user, which is, hopefully they're bringing people into the network and hopefully that's growing. There's a value to that. And then the other piece is the opposite direction, which is the value that is created by the network. So that would be adding partners, adding services, and someone like Facebook, for instance, they are just curating information, really. So they just want people to keep putting information out there because that gets users interested and that creates some value. But then they're also, hopefully finding partners that are building games, that are building, surveys and all of the, stuff on there. I call it something different. I call it crap, but that's okay. But all of those things add residual value to the network. You look at something like Microsoft. Microsoft built an operating system which had some value, but by itself, if it didn't have other services or software on top of that, it wouldn't have been that interesting, right? The first Macs weren't that interesting, mainly because they just didn't have a whole lot of applications other than paint or, a couple other, little things, right? But then over time, Microsoft really said, hey, let's go get all of the developers we can and make our platform really, really easy to, develop for. Well, if they had just done that from the beginning, they might not be where they are today because they had to get the users first to attract the partners. So it's kind of, you can't do just one thing or the other. You know?
Right. And with that, how do you reconcile Android versus iOS? If you think about open and enabling versus more controlled like environments.
Well, and that's a good point, right? So obviously, Android is a very open platform. I mean, it's much easier. It's it's a little bit harder today than it was maybe 2 years ago, but it's really easy to create an app and get it on the Play Store, right? Versus iOS, there's quite a process, right? And they are very choosy. They're very selective for good and bad reasons, right? But if you look at what got Apple in trouble back in the, mid 90s or so, when they had to go begging for people to stay on their platform as far as, partners are concerned and developers, it was because of that closed system. But now they've got enough users on the platform, right, that they've exceeded critical mass. So there is two systems now. There's going to be a number of people that buy whatever Apple sells. And you look at Android, they have problems too, because when you're open, sometimes people do things that you don't want them to, and they create a bad user experience. So,
and we talked about that, whether it was, now I'm forgetting if it was a podcast ago or two ago, but just the fact that there are some apps in Google Play Store that aren't allowed in the App Store. So
right.
there's some more strict regulations in terms of like user data, which obviously I think there are plenty of people who say, oh, well, that's a good thing. But yeah, it's just interesting to kind of see the different qualities.
Well, and when you think about it, right, and you think about externality of the network, you have to think about it in terms of the user as well as the partner. So an externality might be, hey, a bunch of my friends left the dinner party, so, I'm going to go too, right? And then I pull along a few of my friends, right? And so that exponential,
I love the dinner party analogy because I think that is so easy for us all to understand. Let's say you have like 10 people sitting around the table and two of the people who have been kind of the life of the party, they're telling jokes. Everybody's feeling really, really happy about, their stories. And then they're like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to head out. And you just feel like the energy of the room just like, poof, like drops. And you're like, oh, maybe I'll go too, and then before you know it, everybody's gone.
Yeah. And then, the hosts are sitting there with the mess to clean up and,
So is the fate of social media platforms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we get a few of these influencers, and it might not take one of them, right? But if a few of them start to move, there are going to be people in mass that are going to follow them. And that's sort of an externality of the actual network and the value of the network, right? And when you think about the flip side, if you've got the Apple, store, if that has a tax, or if it's kind of viewed as a tax where to get in there, it's a pay to play and you're paying 30% to put your app in there, now all of a sudden there is incentive for you to find something else. And if option A eventually has enough users that are engaged enough, and I can go over there and do it for either free or next to free, where are you going to go?
Yeah. Yeah. And another company that's really pretty fascinating to dig into, which of course you have a lot of experience with, VMware. they had, let's say, slow and steady growth early days and then really hockey sticked.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to what we've been talking about network effect and partners versus users?
And so I like VMware because the whole time I was there, my parents would ask, "So what exactly does VMware do?" You know? And I'd have to explain it to them, and I did that to just about everybody. And when you were at Google and I was at VMware, nobody knew who we were. Nobody knew that we basically took zero funding and Google took a bunch, and our IPO was actually almost just as big.
All our friends knew is that I got off the elevator on the 3rd floor of that building and you got off the elevator on the 8th floor
Yeah, but
to go to VMware.
I could get the same massage if I just went down to your floor. It was great. The thing that VMware had was that it built, and it was an enterprise, and it still is an enterprise solution. Um, it built a really powerful ecosystem. And what they set out to do is really make it easy to get onto the platform, make it easy to, through APIs and other hooks, for other people to make money on deploying that platform. And one of the numbers that we would always tell people is that for every dollar of VMware that you sold another 6 in hardware and software and other pieces. And then typically, if you did it right, you sold another 3 to 4 in professional services. So if you were one of our partners, they got really excited about that because there was a dollar cost additive effect going on with just selling $1 of VMware. So that was one component of the partnership. The other piece is they didn't go and create every single solution. They left it open so that the best solutions could create value. And that's what Microsoft did, right? And I think it's interesting because VMware and Microsoft really, big competitors with Hyper-V and all of those technologies that I won't bore you with, but they became pretty tough competitors right up until now. And the part about it is really the richness of platform and how easy and open it is to be a partner of one of those, and more importantly, to make money.
Yeah. And this may be a bridge too far. It would be kind of magical if we could tie this all together. But how does this tech trend also reflect the acquisition trends with VMware? So acquired by EMC, Dell, and then the flip-flop.
Yeah.
Well, walk me through that.
Well, and that's an interesting point, right? VMware was, we were sort of the tech darling, right? And when EMC bought us, all my buddies over at EMC would always say, "Oh, we own you guys now." Well,
they did.
Well,
there were
two kinds of people that work at EMC, sharks and ones with shark bites in their back. That's the old joke. But one of the things that we had that they really didn't is, and I think one of the reasons that they were interested in this is they really didn't have an ecosystem. They had lock-in because they had hardware. And with the VMware platform, it became pretty easy. There were some places where there was lock-in, right? And when people hear ecosystem or they hear network, they usually associate that with lock-in of some sort. And so when you think about that, we were anti-lock-in in a way for EMC. And we gave them a network and a partner ecosystem that was really arguably much bigger and better than what they had. Now you fast forward, Dell and EMC, which are really one now, they lean heavily on VMware because VMware has all of these rich partnerships because of their platform.
And the platform meaning that it's agnostic.
Well, it's mostly agnostic to a point, But where I'm going with this, they have assembled enough users that have tons of tons of partner software, and it's solving a problem. So the value of the network and the value of paying for all of these things really is tremendous to them. So that has maintained, stasis, and it's all good. Meanwhile, Dell and EMC, the storage components of Dell, have been suffering. I mean, you look at their stock, you look at all of those metrics, that's a market where people just, say, oh, I'm going to buy an HPE server today, or I might buy a Dell server, or I'm going to go to the cloud. And I don't really care about these vendors. People are trying to run away from them. So that's all that I wanted to add to that.
So it's really connected to the hardware to software evolution, and I think it does connect to this idea as related to that of having this device compatibility value and the user / partner value.
Well, and the interesting part about it is we're going right back to hardware again. The Internet of Things is just a big network of hardware.
Right, but the hardware is nothing if you don't have a user behind it. But I think that's always been the case. So I guess your point is totally still there.
And I would argue with that, right? Because autonomy of devices and learning, these devices are getting smarter. And so I guess there is a software component.
But it's the devices are getting smarter. So if we think about it like that timeline, that evolution, that we started with Metcalfe and Ethernet connecting, the value is measured on the compatibility of devices between, for example, telephones and fax machines. Well, those devices aren't intelligent. So fast forward, we're going along our timeline, hardware to software, back to hardware. However, to your point, now these devices are intelligent. Yeah, they need users, but they need users less. Obviously, the telephone doesn't do anything without a user. Well, the devices of today and tomorrow are going to do plenty of things without the user there all the time.
Right. Well, and if you think about a network, right, let's go back to the modem days. How did modems scale, right, so that everybody could dial in? Well, they had to rely on getting enough people on their network that didn't use the network all the time, weren't noisy neighbors, so that they could essentially oversubscribe what they had for a network, right? And when you have a one-to-one relationship, when people pick up their phone, they expect the dial tone to be there. When people would dial in with a modem, they expected a modem to be at the other end that went be-doo, 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 and all those great sounds.
Such an exciting sound.
Yeah, that was like 28.8 sounds right there. But just to date myself. And so when you think about that, that's where they started to get some of those cost-effective pieces, right? Because when you add a user and it's an active user, they're expecting some level of value. And the moment that congestion starts to happen, and congestion starts to happen because you can't keep paying and building out your network forever and ever, you test the boundaries and you try to push it, and then congestion happens, and then it starts to not scale. It starts to not scale because of the pricing, right? So now we're getting to the point, and where I'm going with this, right, is IoT. We're getting millions and billions of devices out there. Well, now people are already saying it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for a car to need 5G to send 2 gigabytes of data back to the mothership to get better machine learning algorithms. That doesn't fly. So now what's happening? There's all these companies, including my old alma mater, Western Digital. They are creating RISC processors now that are designed to sit out at the edge and do edge processing. There are other companies, NGD. There's a number of other companies that are creating these edge processing and storage devices that help reduce some of that burden on the network. And that's really interesting to me because we're right back to the modem pool problem. We're trying to get scale. We're trying to get it so that not every device needs to talk all the time. And the reason for that is that's how we get to value chain and value creation in a network.
So is this a matter of playing traffic cop? Or is there a lot more to it with where we need to take this technology?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, traffic cop is one thing. That traffic cop happens when the traffic is already bad, right? We're getting to the point where technology can allow us to not get caught in the traffic to start with, right? And so that's where this is going. So when we're looking at exciting new networks that get built, and we're talking to startups, if they're talking about, hey, I need to get to 1 million users to make this viable, they're doing math off of somebody else's, homework, right? And that math doesn't work anymore because you can't create the frisbee or the hula hoop, right? Where it takes a whole bunch of time and hopefully people, at the other end of the frisbee are there to catch it and they're just as excited about it as you, and they don't just say, nah, this is boring, and they walk away, right? That kills 2 people, right? So when you think about it and where we're going, you need to be able to build enough, momentum, enough critical mass on the user side of the network, but you also have to quickly generate interest with your partners so that the value of your network isn't just the users, but it's also the partner network. That makes a really lasting company, and that makes a sticky company. Call it lock-in, call it what you want. When value exceeds, what your costs are and what your users' expectations are, meaning their cost, whether that be sharing information, giving you money, or what have you. Their time, or sifting through other people's bullshit, that is when value creation happens, and when, that cost is exceeded. Well, it doesn't matter if it's a user. It doesn't matter if it's a user on Facebook. It doesn't matter if it's one of Microsoft's partners. When the value of that partner network, the ecosystem, grows past the value of the company that essentially builds and curates and maintains the network, then those people are going to stick by them, right? All of those people that pay the 30% tax to make an Apple, app for iOS, they're going to be great as long as the value of that network is exceeding that tax. The moment that it's not, people are going to run off of that, and it's going to happen quickly and abruptly, and they're going to get onto something where they're not paying that tax. And so that almost incents them to try to get off of that network. So the moment that value of the whole network, if that slows down and less people start buying iPhones, partners are going to jump ship really fast because of that value chain is upside down now.
So you bring up partners. What do you mean when you say partners?
So I would say like an example of a who. So for a Microsoft partner, I would say Adobe, or I would say Symantec, someone like that. Someone that, in the case of Adobe, Microsoft doesn't create Photoshop or something even close to that. So Adobe is incented to, tap into the network of people using Microsoft products to develop on their platform and develop that piece. So they're really partners. Another, Symantec making antivirus software. That's another example. The list is long.
So who would be a partner for Facebook?
That's a great question. So I don't think Facebook has a real strong partner network because they're just getting content from places, right? And so mean, call it Zynga, call it, I don't know, whoever's making the different, the different, you know,
Yeah, the
polling
games and,
games
and
and
stuff like that you can play.
games of polling. But I just don't think that the value is there for them long term, because I think they're just tapping into numbers, right? And I don't know if that value is in both directions, because Facebook is really clearly, I don't use Facebook. Why don't I use Facebook? I don't find value in the content, really. I mean, outside of getting pictures from family members or something like that, I don't find a whole lot of value in the network personally. I don't do it for news. You know, I don't really care for their algorithms and how it curates my feed. So I don't really see a whole lot of value. And there's really not any partners that they have that are must haves for me, that I can only do it on Facebook.
Well, and that's the key. Yeah, only do it on Facebook. And so I think that's also the distinction of having the internal network, right? So Facebook's value is truly its user base,
Yeah.
and Microsoft has that external network. And I think that's the whole debate of like, are you a platform or not a platform? It's like that internal external.
Yeah,
Shift.
but I would be careful with the internal and external piece, right? Because it's the ecosystem, right? And I see externality as being forces. I see internals as being why people are in the network, right? That's how I look at it. Other people look at it different ways. But when I think of that really sticky platform that you want to, you know, look at every day or just have in every piece of your life, it has to be a couple things. It has to be trustworthy. You have to, value the information or the service that you get from it. So, meaning what it costs you versus what you get has to be higher. And there has to be other people in the network that are just as incented as I am, because the last network you want to be on is the one where you have the only thing in town that looks exactly like that, and none of your friends are on it, none of your colleagues are on it, and you're a one-off. Like, that's just not a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about that shift that we were talking about, like the timeline, the evolution, and we're getting to IoT and intelligent devices, and taking it even further, autonomous devices. I mean, this is going to completely turn this whole idea on its head of like what a network is and how that value is created.
Well, and when you think about it, it's not going to be as easy as just getting users to sign up for your app anymore. It's not going to be as easy as going out and getting a number of partners, right? I look at the bar for building a company that relies on network effect as being pretty high now. Because, for instance, if you're a company like Domo or Tableau, which does data and analytics, if you don't have 500 plus things that you can attach to in your network, meaning partner data sources that you can natively connect to easily and pull in, if you're a company building stuff like that, you're up against the wall, because you need that to sort of be the starting point to even really attract someone. So the barrier to entry for a new company is really pretty high, because it's high on what you need to create for a user base, as well as what you need to connect to as a partner. So the barrier to entry to start a company is quite high. And so when I see some of these companies that are starting and they have aspirations to, get to 100,000 and then get to 1,000,000, and they're not talking about how they build a partner ecosystem, I'm like, oh man, this is going to be a long road.
Yeah. And having that point of view that you can understand the ecosystem. I think that's the big barrier right there. You can have this fantastic idea, and I think this is what we see quite often when we work with startups, that you can have this wonderful idea, but unless you're tapped into the right network, and I use that with air quotes, whether it's other tech, people, markets, user bases, then it's not going to go anywhere. So, that's where these types of relationships and conversations are so incredibly valuable, because it takes somebody with experience and with that just broader knowledge that, let's face it, startup founders oftentimes don't have. And that's not a knock on them. It's like a different area of expertise and awareness. And especially if someone's, kind of just getting into tech, and they can be an absolute superstar, but they need some help with that network aspect.
Yeah. Well, and when I think about it, right, and to talk more about that full circle, right, now we're getting back to, like we talked about, edge devices, IoT, whatever you want to call it. I think we're at the point where users aren't going to select the networks anymore, right? There is the possibility that your Tesla, which might be autonomous soon, can schedule its own, meetup. It can schedule its own car wash, or whatever. And it's going to pick the network. And so all I'm trying to say is that I think the next big companies, the next big Facebook or Google or something like that, is going to be a company that builds devices that automatically or automagically connect with the networks of their choosing, that have partners that bring value to them or have users that bring value to them. And I think when we really start thinking about that, it's an interesting problem to solve, but there's definitely going to be some kings made over this, or queens.
Just thought of something of, what if part of the value of the next communications platform is almost like it's not a pay to play, but a participate to play. Like, you have to have a certain value that you're offering to the network to even be able to be there.
Well, there have been things like that, though. There have been, I can't think of the name of it. I was on it for a while. It was some exclusive network that you had to, host parties and, have some type of stature.
Well, and I'm thinking
Ivy
about,
was like that.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that because, to your point of networks choosing each other, networks choosing users, right? That's where that connection comes into play. And, I think there's certainly a lot being talked about right now of which users are more valuable than others. So that all comes into play with this.
Well, exactly. And when you start looking at it, there are two arrows in that, vector diagram, right? Where you have the value of users, and if that is sufficiently high, the value of the network is, exceeded, right? So there's actually net positive value. If the value of the partner or the partner network brings sufficient value, that also kind of creates the network positive value, right? And so that could be removing cost from the network because the partner does something in the network that helps, reduce cost, or it could be, figuring out the value of the customer or the user and making sure that that's sufficiently high, right? So I think we're getting long in the tooth, I think. Let's wrap this up and keep it nice and succinct for our users. Let's keep adding value.
Right. Absolutely. No, thank you. This is cool stuff. It definitely has my wheels turning. So hopefully it's good stuff for everybody else too.
Great. Well, let's wrap it up. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Until next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a question or an idea that would be great for us to include on the next episode, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at hello@datamist.com. You can also send us a note on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. And finally, want to give a big thanks to our sponsors, Infonomic Data and Uprise Partners. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next time.